Good morning and welcome to the lucky 13th meeting of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee of 2025. Apologies from Maurice Golden, who is unable to be with us this morning. Our first agenda item is to acknowledge the contribution of Faisal Chowdhury to the work of the committee for the last while, and to welcome in his place Davy Russell, who is our new committee member, and to invite Davy to declare whether there are any relevant interests following his appointment to the committee. Davy.
Committee, I have no other relevant interests other than what's in the members' general register of interest.
That's fine. Thank you very much. That brings us to and welcome. We look forward. I mean, you did join us on our visit to Wishaw neonatal unit on Monday, so you've had an external visit with the committee, but welcome to your first formal meeting of business. And you will see we are very convivial and very jolly, and we will all get through this in a kind of spirit of cooperation and non-partisanship. We now move to agenda item 2, which is consideration of continued petitions. The first of those is youth crime petitions. Now, at our meeting on the 25th of June, before we went off on the summer recess, the committee heard from the Right Honourable Dorothy Bain, KC, the Lord Advocate, and officials from the Scottish Children's Reporter Administration and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. The committee then heard from Angela Constance, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, and her officials from the Scottish Government, and the session covered issues raised during our consideration of both those petitions. Petition 1947 to address Scotland's culture of youth violence, and Petition 2064 to ensure that under-16s charged with rape are treated as adults within the criminal justice system. As we recently gathered oral evidence on these petitions together, are members content that we discuss them together? Yeah. So, therefore, Petition 1947 to address Scotland's culture of violence was lodged by Alex O'Kane, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to address the disturbing culture of youth violence in Scotland. And the second of those petitions, in 2064, is ensure that under-16s charged with rape are treated as adults in the criminal justice system, was lodged by Julie Mitchell. And it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to ensure, as it says in the petition, that under-16s are charged with rape are treated as adults in the criminal justice system. And as I mentioned, we took evidence on the issues related to these petitions in June, and since then we've received a written submission from the Lord Advocate which provides data on cases of sexual and violent offending. Now, both these petitions have been issues of concern, great concern to the committee. The petition in respect of Alex O'Kane, members will know, although there's no, I'm the only member left who was present, was the subject of a visit to Glasgow to meet with those who had been most badly affected in horrendous ways with the culture of youth violence. So these are petitions that we've taken a great deal of interest in during the course of this Parliament, and I think the issues within them are still relevant and live, but the time, I think, for us in this Parliament now to do further work is limited in the extreme, and I'm of the view that we've maybe taken these petitions as far forward in this Parliament as we can. I would very much like to suggest that we now summarise all of the work that we've done, and that in closing the petitions we would write to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs with that information. The summary letter, I think, would then be published on the committee's pages so that individuals could see the work that we've done, and then that we would say to the petitioners that these issues still live may very well sensibly be pursued with fresh petitions at the start of the next session. But I wonder if colleagues would agree with that, if there's anything further they'd like to add by way of testament. Fergus Ewing?
Yes, I would agree with that, Convener. I think both are very serious petitions indeed, and both raise points that I'm sure are of huge concern to a broader number of people in Scotland. And the basic principle is that if someone commits rape, then it's committing an adult offence and should be treated in the adult courts rather than through the children's system, which is seen as a soft option. I'm absolutely certain that the petitioners speak for a lot of people. I think I did want to make the point that the impression I gained from the Lord Advocate's evidence, and we did press the Lord Advocate and our colleagues very strongly on this, was that there is a new approach being taken, both to involve the victim more in decisions that are taken, and also I felt that there should be more referrals to the adult system rather than the children's system. The Lord Advocate didn't specifically say that, though. She didn't quite, as I would say, spit it out. But I would very much hope that the Lord Advocate, who obviously treats these matters extremely seriously, to be fair to her, will get the message that the public expects that there should be a stronger approach taken. That was my takeaway, and I just wanted to put that in the record.
We could, of course, I think, summarise our impression that that was the case in the letter that we put to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice.
Yep.
Yep. So our committee members agreed. We are. The next petition we're considering this morning is 2089 to stop more national parks in Scotland, lodged by Deborah Carmichael on behalf of the Lochaber National Park and War Group. And the petition called on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to suspend any action to create further national parks in Scotland, to instruct an independent review on the operation of the current national parks, including assessment of the economic impacts on businesses and industries within the two parks, including but not exclusive to farming, forestry, crofting and angling, to conduct a consultation with representatives of rural businesses and community councils in order to help to frame the remit of said independent review. Now, we last looked at this on the 22nd of January. At that point, we wrote to the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands to highlight the issues that were raised during the committee's consideration of the petition, including the impact of existing national parks and the consultation process, and Nature Scot in particular, their role as the reporter. And we also wrote to Dumfries and Galloway Council. The Cabinet Secretary's response provides information on the wider impacts of national parks based on information provided by the two Scottish park authorities. The submission reiterates the Scottish Government's position that there are no current plans to conduct an independent review of the two existing national parks in Scotland. This is a disappointment to us in the committee, I think. The Cabinet Secretary states that this is because national parks are accountable to their boards and to the Scottish Government. Delivery is monitored and reviewed at regular meetings between the Scottish Government and National Park Authority conveners and Chief Executive. Park authorities are also required to produce annual reports and accounts which are laid before Parliament and published. Now, the response provides details of the public consultation that was launched in November last year and highlights that Nature Scot has commissioned an independent review of the consultation process, whatever that means. We have received a written submission from No Galloway National Park campaign, which reiterates concern with Nature Scot's role as reporter. Indeed, and raises points about the impact of the Natural Environment Bill. Since these submissions were received, the Scottish Government announced that it has decided not to pursue a proposal to designate Galloway in Ayrshire as a national park. The recommendation made by the reporter was not to proceed with the designation, but instead strengthen a range of existing arrangements, including a better resource to more influential Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Biosphere Reserve, a renewed focus on people and nature alongside commercial forestry operations in the Galloway Forest Park, and a new commitment to the implementation of management strategies for the three national scenic areas. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr Torrens.
Thank you, Convener. In light of the evidence before us, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has decided not to pursue a proposal to designate Galloway and Ayrshire as a national park. And the Scottish Government has been clear that it does not plan to commission an independent review of the existing national parks.
Mr Ewing.
Could I say that, although I am completely partial here, because I know and am friendly with the petitioner Deborah Carmichael, that she and her colleagues have been spectacularly successful in Aim 1, which was to prevent the creation of further national parks, which frankly Scotland needs like a hole in the head at the moment. And could I just say that the government decision to decline an independent review of parks is a ridiculous decision. There is no accountability at the moment. Board members are not allowed to speak out. If they do, they get disciplined. The annual report is simply what the park says. The idea that it is in any way an independent review is completely ludicrous and preposterous. There must be an independent review of national parks, because many people in my constituency, and I reside within the national park, feel that it's not doing a good job. And that's why, when asked the question in an opinion poll, do you think that the National Park is doing a good job? 3% yes, said yes, and 92% said no. So I think that really speaks for itself, Convener, but congratulations to Deborah Carmichael for a very successful petition, successful outcome in persuading the government to drop this absurd proposal.
Thank you. Well, that therefore is on the record. But I'm minded, in closing the petition, if colleagues are content, to say that the committee were unpersuaded by the arguments not to hold a national review, and that we believe that this government's decision is ill-judged and something of a fudge. Are committee members content to have that added into the record? Then that is what we will do. Thank you. That brings us to... Gosh, I see we've got guests with us, and I'm just wondering whether we might... Are these new petitions that... What are we... Which one is that? Yes, I think just because we have, I shall rearrange the order on the consideration in order to facilitate colleagues who have turned out, which brings us to petition number 2112 to conduct an independent review of childcare costs and availability in Scotland. This has been lodged by Carol Erskine on behalf of Pregnant Then Screwed. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to commission an independent review of publicly funded early learning and childcare in Scotland in order to better understand and address the challenges families face when trying to secure and afford childcare. And we last considered this petition in October last year, when we agreed then to write to the National Day Nurseries Association, the NDNA, Scottish Private Nursery Association, surprisingly the SPNA, the Parents Group, Connect, COSLA and the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills. The Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise wrote to the committee on the 29th of November last. In her letter, she reiterates that the Scottish Government does not plan to commission an external review at this point in time, and that it intends to learn from an evaluation of the 1140 hours of funded early learning and childcare. This evaluation was due in 2025. The Minister also references the Government's early adopter community work taking place in 6 local authorities and aiming to help the Government understand what it takes to deliver local childcare systems that support families with children. The submission from the National Day Nurseries Association supports the aim of the petition and expresses concerns that the delivery of the 1140 hours policy, in itself beneficial, can lead to closures of nurseries due to unsustainable funding and workforce pressures. This is echoed by the submission from the Scottish Private Nursery Association, which states that the failure by some local councils to pass the full funding for 1140 hours on to childcare providers leads to nurseries increasing their fees in order to cover the shortfall. The submission from Connect highlights the results of their 2021 survey surrounding experiences of the 1140 hours entitlement, and among its conclusions was the lack of variety and flexibility in the range and type of childcare provision, which sometimes leads to many funded hours going unused because the arrangements make no practical sense for families or their needs. And on the other hand, COSLA's response points us to their publication Getting In Early, Local Government's Role in Delivering Early Learning and Childcare, which highlights increases in the numbers of children accessing funded ELC and in proportion of children accessing the full 1140 hours entitlement. And then finally, we've received written submissions this morning from our colleagues Liam MacArthur, MSP, and Monica Lennon, MSP, and they both show that the current approach to childcare provision does not work for families and support the petition's call for an independent review of publicly funded ELC in Scotland. We are joined this morning by our colleague Megan Gallagher, MSP, and I wonder if Megan Gallagher would just like to address a few words to the committee before we determine how might we best proceed.
Well, thank you very much, Convener, and good morning, committee. Before I get into any opening words this morning, I would like to declare an interest as I sit on the advisory board for Pregnant Then Screwed. So it will come as no surprise that I am here this morning to support the petition in the name of Carol Erskine and the fantastic work that Pregnant Then Screwed do in order to highlight the challenges that many families right across the country face when it comes to childcare in Scotland. Now, I think it's very prevalent from the petition that has been submitted in relation to the 2,600 submissions that were put in from parents who are really struggling to grapple with the current 1140 offering. If I can use my personal example with my own daughter, who's 3, I've just embarked on the 1140-hour process, and it's not an easy process even to fill out the forms. It's usually quite a lengthy process. You have to number 1, 2, 3 in terms of favouring what nursery or childcare provision you wish your child to undertake, and then you are at the beholding of local government as to whether or not you are going to obtain a place at one of those nursery slots, or indeed be directed to another nursery provision elsewhere. This usually ends up being the case where parents have to travel considerable amounts of distance in order to drop their child off at childcare provision, and that doesn't even begin to look at the costs that are associated with the 1140 childcare provision. So if we look at the hours itself, that usually covers roughly 2 full days and half a day. Well, if you're a full-time working parent, you'll still have to cough up the cost for another 2 full days if you are full-time. So that shows you the significant financial challenges, not only trying to access a nursery that's close to home, but of course the additional costs that are associated with the current funding model that we have here in Scotland. In terms of the survey that was undertaken by Pregnant and Screwed, and that's the 2,600 parents that I've just mentioned, 83.7% of parents have said that their childcare costs are the same or more than their income. And if anyone was listening to the radio this morning, you'll have heard from a parent who was explaining that childcare costs could amount to £1,600 a month. So that shows you the stark costs of childcare here in Scotland. And again, I think it was a very useful response that you've received from SPNA and NDNA in relation to the request from the petition this morning, and their concerns about the fact that local government, given that they have the overall control of the budgets, considering the requirement in terms of providing funded hours, nurseries within local authority areas actually can accommodate normally working parents who, for example, have 9 to 5 jobs, because you're dropping your child off usually about 8 o'clock in the morning, and you might not be able to pick up until 6 o'clock, and not all local authorities are able to provide that offering, which means that they have to rely on the private sector, who are usually the poor man within the relationship with local authorities when it comes to 1140. I do believe that it is time that we have an independent review, because we need to understand fully the costs that are associated with parents, what they're having to front up in addition to 1140. Of course, we've also seen the offering expanded in terms of free funded childcare in other areas of the United Kingdom from 9 months until 3 years old. And again, it's something that I do believe that should be considered. We should put childcare back at the top of the agenda in government, and my request would be to the committee to perhaps not close the petition. If we could look at perhaps referring to a committee. I understand that we do have roughly about 20 weeks left before the end of this parliamentary term. However, we do have legacy reports, and even if it's something that the committee did not find time to consider between now and the end of this parliamentary term, it might be something that could be contained within a legacy report, meaning that this parliament is taking the issues that parents right across the country are experiencing on a daily basis when it comes to providing their children with the best possible start in life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope we can do a bit more yet than that. Colleagues, do any suggestions for action? David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of the evidence before us, I wonder if the committee would consider writing to a Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise and ask what evaluation report for the 1,140 hours entitlement will be published, and what actions the Scottish Government intends to take in light of its recommendations, and what preliminary conclusions the Scottish Government has drawn from the early adopter communities work, and what actions it will take based on this.
Thank you. Any other comments from colleagues? Are we therefore content to keep the petition open and to make that further representation to the Scottish Government? We are, so thank you very much, Megan Gallagher. We'll keep the petition open and we will act on that basis. I'll now leap forward to petition number 1864 to increase the ability of communities to influence planning decisions for onshore wind farms. Of those colleagues who have come along to perform for the committee this morning would like to take their places. And this petition, number 1864, to increase the ability of communities to influence planning decisions for onshore wind farms, was lodged by Aileen Jackson on behalf of the Scotland Against Spin. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to increase the ability of communities to influence planning decisions for onshore wind farms by adopting the English planning legislation for the determination of onshore wind farm developments, empowering local authorities to ensure local communities are given sufficient professional help to engage in the planning process, and appointing an independent advocate to ensure that local participants are not bullied and intimidated during public inquiries. We last considered this petition on the 13th of November last, where we agreed to write to the Minister for Public Finance, and the committee first requested an update on the publication of guidance on effective community engagement in local development planning, and this was published on December the 20th. The committee then asked for an update on the work to progress proposals for raising the current 50 megawatt threshold to allow planning authorities to determine more applications for onshore wind farms. The response from the former Minister for Climate Action referenced the investing in planning consultation on resourcing Scotland's planning system, but was otherwise vague about further action, stating that the Government continues to, and I quote, to consider the process and timeline for making any changes to the Electricity Act 1989 threshold, unquote. Finally, the committee also asked what consideration the Scottish Government gave to ensuring support was available to members of the public who wished to participate in public inquiries. The Minister's response indicates continued engagement between the Planning and Environmental Appeals Division, the DPEA, the petitioner and other stakeholders in relation to their experiences at inquiries. The Minister also mentions the planned publication of DPEA guidance in relation to the use of community sessions, which would allow members of the community who may not wish to participate in an inquiry to state their case to a reporter in a less formal environment. We've also received additional written submissions from the petitioner. Ms Jackson mentions that the effective community engagement in local development planning guidance fails to address the issue of local support becoming a key material consideration in the decision-making process, which has been repeatedly asked for. The petitioner also states that DPEA has not, in fact, engaged with Scotland Against Spin regarding the concerns raised in relation to support for participation in inquiries. Additionally, she notes that a year after the publication of the Investing and Planning consultation, still no decision has been made by the Scottish Government on the matter of 50 megawatt threshold, despite the proposals being supported by the majority of those who responded. As colleagues will know, a joint UK and Scottish Government review of electricity infrastructure consenting has concluded. In a submission to a related petition, the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy has indicated that reform arising from this consultation is being implemented through the Planning and Infrastructure Bill currently progressing through the UK Parliament. The Cabinet Secretary is also committed to publishing guidance for measures to take effect 2 months after the bill receives royal assent, and to consult on any additional measures enabled by Scottish ministers' new regulation-making powers. Now, I'm aware of the petitioner's call for a whole Parliament debate on the matter, which is supported by some of our MSP colleagues. What I would like to highlight to members, of course, is the limited time we have left until the end of the session, in addition to the number of other petitions that the committee has already agreed or has indicated that it would wish to seek time in the chamber for debate. We've received submissions in support of this petition from several MSP colleagues, and there was a veritable posse of parliamentarians of my colour who were very excited at the prospect of coming along to address the committee this morning, and I have generously invited 2 of them to represent that extensive desire to perform today. And they are Alexander Burnett MSP and Brian Whittle MSP. And I wonder if, at their own behest as to who will shout first, they would like, or who will sing for their supper first, who would like to address the committee first before we determine how we might proceed. Mr. Burnett.
Thank you, Convener. In the vein of that excitement, can I thank the Convener and the committee for the opportunity to speak today. And I speak in support of Petition P 1864, which calls for a stronger role for communities in planning decisions on onshore wind farms. As MSP for Aberdeenshire West, I've received more contact on energy infrastructure than any other issue. Rural communities are powerless when large-scale energy projects are proposed, and areas like the Cabrick have been devastated by developments imposed on them despite strong and reasoned objections. Now, this petition seeks to democratise the planning system by preventing the Energy Consents Unit from overruling local decisions, providing professional support to help communities make submissions, and appointing an independent advocate to ensure inquiries are fair. Now, currently, projects over 50 megawatts bypass local authorities and go to the Energy Consents Unit, removing much-needed local influence in the decision-making process. And this leaves under-resourced rural communities struggling to navigate complex processes with limited support up against well-resourced renewables companies. Now, by contrast, in England, developers must align with local plans and secure genuine community backing. Whereas in Scotland, engagement is often superficial and even successful local opposition is frequently overturned. Since 2023, a number of wind turbines have been approved against local community wishes, 10 in Caithness, 26 in Aberdeenshire and 97 in Dumfries and Galloway. And all have been approved by the Energy Consents Unit despite strong local objections. The Hill of Fare proposal, currently at public inquiry, and where I spoke on Monday, illustrates the problem. A community survey back in 23 shows that only 11% of residents supported this proposal, and a local group has spent 3 years preparing a gold standard case with over 1,500 objections. Now, all 6 community councils have resoundingly rejected this proposal, as has Aberdeenshire Council on 4 separate occasions. At every level of elected representation, this project has been opposed, and the community's anger could not be clearer. Now, whilst we remain hopeful, the outcome is still uncertain at this inquiry. But communities should not feel powerless. They deserve a planning system where they have a statutory voice, and I urge the Scottish Government to adopt these reforms and restore balance to the planning process, and ask for the support of the Petitions Committee in advancing this petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Burnett. That was commendably concise. Mr Whittle?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the committee. I will also try and be commendably concise.
That would be appreciated.
Can I begin by commending the petitioners and everyone else who's contributed as this petition has progressed. I'm a South of Scotland MSP, and like Mr Burnett, my mailbag and my surgeries are full of people concerned about the level of development that's happening within their communities. And I think ultimately this petition is about how we balance the national imperative to reduce our vulnerability to volatile and finite fossil fuel resources against ensuring that the communities who will have to live in the shadow of this infrastructure are not overwhelmed by it. It's clear to me that currently we do not have that balance right. As the petitioners have highlighted in their submissions, all too often communities feel they're in an uphill battle just to be heard during the planning process. This complex, bureaucratic planning process for this kind of infrastructure isn't something any group of individuals can take on easily. The costs are high, both in time and money, and the return on all that investment can end up being little more than an automated response email from a government department acknowledging receipt. Now, there are some developers who do go above and beyond to engage with communities and alter their plans to try and accommodate local concerns, but this can often be the exception rather than the rule. In many cases, people aren't challenging development because of a blanket opposition to it, but because they're trying to understand how developments will affect them and have confidence that their concerns are being understood. The current approach to planning simply isn't equipped to offer any of that certainty, and there's no question in my mind that this planning process could and should be improved. And the best day to improve it, of course, was yesterday. Can I add my voice and gently urge the committee to consider bringing this petition to the Chamber for debate and allow members on all sides of the Chamber who are dealing with these issues to stand up for their constituents. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. And can I commend, obviously, Tim Eagle, Rachel Hamilton, Douglas Lumsden and Tess White, who all hoped to be able to also address the committee. Tim Eagle has tabled a written submission, as has Russell Finlay, Finlay Carson and Emma Harper. So a very considerable degree of interest from colleagues in relation to this matter. A debate potentially in the Chamber being one of the things suggested, but I wonder if there are suggestions for action. I saw Mr Ewing's hand up first, I think.
Yes, I think the evidence we've heard this morning from other MSPs, but above all from people throughout Scotland, is that communities feel swamped, overwhelmed. Community councils, although statutory consultees, feel they are ignored and their voice is not heard, and that the decisions will be taken by the Scottish Government irrespective. And that view was the predominant view at a meeting in the Highlands over the summer, attended by 10 elected parliamentarians and 300 people representing 60 of the over 100 community councils. Many of those who didn't attend are moribund, are not functioning. So I have no hesitation here. The Minister must come and give evidence to this committee and explain herself. I think I've just also add, Convener, that until there is such time as there is an energy policy in Scotland, which we lack at the moment, which sets out what we need in terms of a properly balanced grid, including an analysis of whether, in fact, baseload and backup is required. Without some sort of baseload or backup provision, it's a bit like trying to wrap a Christmas present without enough paper. You simply can't function when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. Storage is hopelessly inadequate. The interconnector failed and there was nearly a blackout in Britain on the 8th of January this year. So the situation is parlous. There's no energy policy in Scotland. The questions how much wind energy is enough and how much is too much scarcely ever seem to be asked in this place. So we need the Energy Minister to come here and answer a variety of questions, and I think it will be a very long session, Convener.
Well, there's a proposal from Mr Ewing that we invite the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy to attend a meeting of the committee. Are colleagues content to support that suggestion?
Agreed. Convener.
Agreed. We are all unanimously agreed. So we will keep the petition open and we will seek now to have a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary, and we will obviously let all members who have expressed an interest in this petition make sure that they are aware of when that session is taking place. And at my discretion, potentially one or two might be able to put some questions to the Cabinet Secretary at that time. Thank you very much. We will now revert back to the original order. Petition number 2109 to halt any further pump storage hydro schemes on Scottish lochs holding wild Atlantic salmon. This petition has been lodged by Brian Shaw on behalf of the Ness District Salmon Fishery Board. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to create a moratorium on any further development of pump storage hydro operations on Scottish lochs holding wild Atlantic salmon until the impact of such developments on wild Atlantic salmon migrations is understood. And I apologise, it's rather a long introductory note I have to detail. We last considered this petition on the 27th of November 24, and we agreed then to write to the Scottish Government, major developers of pumped storage schemes, including Scottish and Southern electricity networks, and the UNESCO Centre for Water Law, Policy and Science. The Scottish Government's response states that environmental impact assessment regulations envisage that for large infrastructure projects, significant environmental effects are more likely to occur. The EIA regulations require that ministers must determine the application and the knowledge of what significant effects are likely to occur in consideration of any mitigation measures forming part of the development or to be secured by conditions of any consent. Consideration of any likely significant effects at the conclusion of the EIA process then forms part of the planning balance. UNESCO's response states that while there are some very good reasons to support pumped storage hydro, there are also grounds to pause and consider alternatives. UNESCO described the benefits of PSH, including grid balancing, reducing the need for carbon emissions, energy security and job creation. However, the submission states that the proposals represent huge interventions in our landscapes and rivers. UNESCO considers that if any or all of the proposals threaten the dwindling populations of Atlantic salmon, the impacts will be cumulative year by year and could ultimately lead to species losses. The submission also states that protected species and habitats will inevitably be adversely impacted by the various PSH proposals under consideration. SSE Renewables submission provides information about its experience with pumped storage hydro technology through the Foyers power station at Loch Ness. The submission also highlights research and monitoring which found no observed impact on the flow of smolts at Foyers. Glen Eirch Energy's response shares that it has been undertaking, I'm getting an admonishing look from Mr. Ewing there, relevant work, and the petitioners group, the Ness District Salmon Fisheries Board, Nature Scot, SEPA and the Highland Council. This work included a smolt tracking study to understand smolt behaviour in Loch Ness. Similarly, Statkraft's response highlights work that it is undertaking with the Ness District Salmon Fisheries Board on smolt tracking. The petition, it's quite a long introduction. The petitioner has provided a written submission which highlights the findings of the computational fluid dynamics study in Loch Ness. This study was set up to examine the cumulative impact of pumped storage on the hydrology and temperature regime. The submission states that the effect in Loch Ness is profound, with cold water currents crossing the loch, changes to the temperature profile, including at depth, and the formation of a vortex at Doris Bay. Edward Mountain MSP has provided a written submission noting his register of interest, which shows that he owns part of a wild salmon fishery. Well, we've never seen the benefit of it here. A matter I shall have to separately pursue. But he also wishes to put on record his management of fisheries on the Ness and Loch Ness until 2006. Mr Mountain's submission states that wild Atlantic salmon in Scotland are in serious decline. He believes that pumped storage at Loch Ness has proven that there are real threats to the environment that have not yet been fully evaluated. The submission suggests that as a precaution, pumped storage hydro schemes should not be allowed unless it can be proved that the overall temperature of the loch and indeed the surface temperature does not increase or affect migratory fish. Well, with apologies for that very long preamble, I wonder if colleagues have any comments or suggestions as to what we do next. Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence, I wonder if a committee would consider writing to SEPA and Nature Scot to ask what information they hold on the impact of pumped storage hydro on wild Atlantic salmon and how this is considered when providing comment on planning applications in their role as a statutory consultee. And I wonder if the committee would also consider writing to Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy to note the committee's disappointment with the Scottish Government's recent response as it fails to address the concerns raised by the committee regarding how a cumulative impact of pumped storage hydro is monitored and assessed, and ask for further information at this point.
Thank you, Mr Torrance. That's very helpful. Are there any other comments? Mr Russell.
This isn't new. Like, the pump storage schemes have been going, especially in the Highlands, in Norway, different countries like that, for 70 years. You know, so there must be enough data to show if it has a damaging impact to the environment and the species that are affected. You know, it's not a new thing here. You know, I'm odd to see, you know, that there must be enough information there. Been going for 70 years in various shapes and forms.
Okay, thank you. Mr Ewing?
Yeah, I think Mr Russell makes a fair point, and it's certainly not new. I think what's perhaps a bit different about the situation facing those with an interest in Loch Ness is the cumulative impact of several proposals. If it were one or two, that would be one thing, but there are several. The companies that have replied have defended their own proposal, but that's not really what the main concerns are. It's the cumulative impact of numerous proposals. And so I would certainly support Mr Torrance's recommendation with the additional request that the Minister also consider, as well as impacts on wild salmon, the other potential impacts, including water levels, for those users of the Loch and the Caledonian Canal. There are concerns which I heard of over the weekend in the constituency that I represent, that water levels could be seriously depleted at certain periods of operation of the intended pump storage levels. I don't know whether that's the case or not, but I do know that if that happens, then an awful lot of the existing businesses that survive by providing, boat trips in Loch Ness, fishing, leisure craft, those who use the Caledonian Canal, they were there first, so I think their interests are entitled to be considered. So I just thought I'd add that, because I think the petitioners have raised one particular area, and I know Mr Shaw, I should declare that, and I've engaged with him, and he adopts a very forensic approach to this, but I think there's other issues as well.
And how would we accommodate that in with Mr Torrance's?
I think we just add it into the letter to the Minister, perhaps.
Okay, fine. We're content with that? We are. Petition number 2110 to protect wild wrasse stocks. This petition is lodged by Charles Miller, calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to develop and introduce a statutory fisheries management plan focused on protecting wild wrasse stocks in Scottish waters, beginning with a data collection exercise and introduction of precautionary fishery management measures ahead of the next fishing season, commencing in May 25. Obviously, the petition was lodged some time ago. We last considered this petition on the 30th of October 24, and we then agreed to write the Scottish Government. In particular, the committee was keen to find out what consideration the Scottish Government gave to the total allowable catch limits on commercial wrasse fishing, and what discussions it had with the UK Government in the development of its wrasse complex fisheries management plan, including the potential to develop similar measures in Scottish waters. In its response of December 24, the Scottish Government indicates that it has no plans to introduce a total allowable catch limit for each of the 5 constituent species of wrasse. It points to overall catch limits being applied in Norway, but it considers that since that approach is based on a fixed point in time, it is not a valid measure of sustainability. Additionally, the Government highlights an unintended consequence of Norway's catch limits, whereby fishers seek to land as many fish as possible before the overall limit has been reached. The petitioner, however, considers that a daily or weekly catch limit could be set to prevent all the fishing effort taking place at the start of the fishing season. The Scottish Government's response also mentions that it is co-funding a PhD research studentship which investigates appropriate principles of possible catch rules for wrasse species. Regarding engagement with the UK Government, the Scottish Government states that it has set out the selection criteria used for the first fisheries management plans within the Joint Fisheries Statement. Additionally, the Government has considered the Sea Fish Industry Authority to undertake some initial scoping work to help inform Scotland's approach to FMPs for non-quota species, including wrasse. This work involves engagement with the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Now, as recently as June, the Scottish Government published the Regulated Commercial Use of Traps, Pots to Catch Wrasse in Scottish Inshore Waters Fisheries Assessment. And in its response to this assessment, the petitioner welcomes the fact that wrasse fishery is now closed in special areas of conservation and in some nature conservation marine protected areas. However, he's disappointed that the assessment still does not include a total allowable catch stock assessment or anything relating to managing the fishery out with these areas. And we have, in addition, received a very late submission from the Cabinet Secretary, which arrived yesterday in relation to this petition, which it's really quite difficult, I think, to properly have had time to consider ahead of the petition. But does kind of, I think, touch on some of the matters that I've just detailed in my preamble. Do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr. Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence and the Government's response, I wonder if we can consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standard Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has stated that it has commissioned initial work to inform Scotland's approach to fisheries management plans for non-quota species, including wrasse. And wrasse fishery is now closed in special areas of conservation and in some nature conservation marine protected areas. And while currently the Scottish Government has no plans to introduce a total allowable catch limit for wrasse, it supports the research into appropriate principles of possible catch rules for wrasse species.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Torrens. Colleagues? Mr. Ewing.
Yes, I agree with the proposal, and I would perhaps unusually say that I think the responses from the Scottish Government have been pretty thorough and well argued, and the Marine Directorate, of course, has provided a great deal of information and contradicted some of the claims made by the petitioners in their submissions that have been received recently. In particular, the statement that new management measures weren't introduced. They were introduced in 21 and applied across Scottish waters, not just SACs and MPAs. So I think, to be fair, there has been a thorough kick of the ball, and it's open to petitioners to come back in the next Parliament if they feel that matters need to be considered again.
Our colleagues content. We are. So we thank the petitioner for the work that they've done, and we will close the petition, but clearly that is an ongoing situation that can be monitored and potentially returned to in the next 7th session of Parliament. Petition number 2120 to permanently remove peak fare pricing from ScotRail services. This petition was lodged by Tam Wilson on behalf of the Scottish Trades Union Congress. I'd like to express appreciation to all those who have contributed further evidence to the committee, and of course the committee will be aware of the action that has subsequently been announced by the Scottish Government, in the light of which I wonder if colleagues are content for us to close this petition, in that the objective of the petition has now been achieved. Agreed. So we congratulate those who have been associated with the aims of this petition and note its successful achievement. That brings us to new petitions, agenda item 3, and the first of those new petitions is petition number 2151 to grant protected status to primitive goat species in the Scottish borders. And I believe it's possible we have the petitioner with us this morning, but I would invite any colleagues who might wish to address us in relation to this petition to come forward. This new petition has been lodged by Kenneth Eric Moffat, and the petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to help ensure the survival of primitive goat species in the Scottish borders by granting them protected status. The Spice briefing for this petition highlights Nature Scot's position regarding what they term feral goats, whilst Nature Scot has indicated that some Scottish feral goat herds have been established for a long time and may be described as naturalised. It considers feral goats to be an invasive non-native species with the potential to cause serious damage to habitats by way of overgrazing, for which reason they have to be managed. However, Nature Scot recognises that feral goat herds are held in affection by people and often have strong local cultural links. In its initial response to the petition, the Scottish Government makes it clear that it has no plans to provide full legal protected status for primitive goats. The Government echoes Nature Scot in supporting the reduction of feral goat numbers to prevent damage to habitats or forestry, similar to the way deer populations are managed. In terms of the specific circumstances in the Scottish borders, the Government's submission states that it is for landowners to consider how any reduction in the feral goat population should be achieved in practice. And it's also worth noting that the Scottish Government acknowledges that feral goats may have some positive benefits for biodiversity. Such benefits include providing food for eagles and carrion feeders, and more importantly, preventing open habitats from scrubbing over, with goats having already been used for this purpose in Tentsmuir and Fife. We've also received a submission from the Wild Goat Conservation Trust in support of the petition, arguing that granting protected status to wild goats would enable regulation of numbers through licensing, so that there will always be a healthy herd of wild goats in balance with the rest of the upland wildlife. In additional submissions, the petitioner provides extensive evidence as to the unique nature of the primitive goat herds, and he objects to Nature Scot and the Scottish Government's use of the terms feral and invasive as opposed to wild. In his view, these terms mischaracterise the importance of an endangered species and make it easier to oppose the granting of protected status. The petitioner also deplores what he calls the overzealous culling, his words, of wild goats in the Langham and Newcastleton Hills, which he sees as unethical and unsustainable. We have also received a submission this morning in support of this petition from our colleague Emma Harper, MSP, and we are joined by our colleagues Rachel Hamilton and Craig Hoy. And I would invite both of them to offer any pearls of wisdom to the committee ahead of our consideration as to what next steps we might take. And I take it that Rachel Hamilton is going to go first.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for the welcome. And also I'd like to thank Kenneth Moffat for bringing forward this petition. He's unfortunately not able to make it today, but I do welcome members of the Wild Goat Conservation Trust to the meeting today. In March 2023, an investment company called Oxygen Conservation Limited acquired 11,000 acres of Langham Moor to protect and promote carbon sequestration and generate carbon credits. However, in February this year, the same company culled over 80% of the herd of ancient wild goats during the breeding season, prompting widespread concern across the local community. Not only are these goats ecologically significant, but they also form part of the cultural and natural heritage of the Scottish borders. They have roamed freely between Langham and Newcastleton for centuries, contributing to the biodiversity of the uplands and attracting visitors from across the country. Despite their long-standing presence, wild goats currently, as you are aware, committee members, have no legal protection in Scotland, and the Scottish Government have stated that they have, I quote, no plans to provide full legal protected status for primitive goats or feral goats. Unlike other species such as pigeons or parakeets, they can be culled during the breeding season with no safeguards for pregnant or nursing animals. This lack of statutory protection leaves them vulnerable to actions that can severely impact herd viability. The recent cull has highlighted the fragility of their status, and over 13,000 people have signed petition PE 2151, and I have a copy here, calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Government to grant protected status to primitive goat species in the borders. Their message is clear. These animals matter and their future must be safeguarded. Concerns about landscape damage, as highlighted by the convener, or population control are not supported by evidence. Goat numbers have remained broadly stable across Scotland, and unlike deer, they are easier to manage. With traditional livestock numbers declining in upland areas, wild goats may even help to fill ecological gaps. Losing this herd would be a loss not only to biodiversity but also to the identity of Langham and Newcastleton communities. The Parliament now has the opportunity to act by reviewing the Wildlife Countryside Act 1981, which currently excludes goats from protection on the basis of non-native status. We must consider changes that reflect their ecological role and cultural value and extend appropriate safeguards, particularly during breeding season, to ensure their continued presence in the Scottish borders. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Rachel Hamilton. Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, committee members. I attend the committee today alongside Rachel Hamilton to speak in support of the petition lodged by Kenneth Moffat, which reflects the very real sense of public anger and concern at the culling of wild goats by Oxygen Conservation in February. The petition was signed by over 13,000 concerned citizens, which is, I believe, Convener, one of the largest ever groups to petition this Parliament and this committee. The Langham goats have grazed the hills peacefully and quietly, existing for generations without any significant issues, with careful and sensitive management. And if anyone wants to know more about the history of the goat population in Scotland, I do note that the committee on their website has listed a reference to the document of the report, A Poor Man's Mark, the History and Archaeology of Goats in Scotland, which was authored by Catherine Smith, which is useful putting this into context. Because in February, in a rush after maximum financial return, we have seen those with outside commercial interests seek to go too far and dramatically reduce the goat population for what I believe are entirely the wrong reasons. They did so without undertaking proper and meaningful community consultation, and I think the petition we see before us today reflects the community's response to that. Worse still, alternatives such as fencing around tree planting or working more closely with neighbouring landowners such as the Tarras Valley Nature Reserve were not properly explored. So companies such as the Natural Capital organisation, Oxygen Conservation, I think need to better understand the need to work in partnership with communities in the Scottish Borders and in Dumfriesshire and not work against them, which is, I think has occurred in this instance. And Convener, where I think these commercial entities do not take cognizance of community concern, I believe that Nature Scot and other bodies should not turn a blind eye. But sadly, in this case, I think Nature Scot have done so and are too remote and too bureaucratic. And I would encourage the committee to explore this directly with Nature Scot themselves. My constituents committee feel that in this case, the hundreds of wild goats who graze between the 30,000 acres between Newcastle and Langham, Nature Scot came down on the side of big commercial and corporate interests rather than serve the local people who care deeply about their local landscapes and their ecosystem. And I think this reflects the fact that the present processes fail to recognise or understand the strength of local feeling. They fail to recognise and understand how important it is to the local community that the goats are free to roam the Langham Hills. And therefore, anything I think the committee can do to address this imbalance must be explored. In summary, the petition makes a strong case for more robust protection measures and processes for locally important species, such as the wild goats of Langham Moor. And without some form of designated protection, as Rachel Hamilton said, it is clear that Nature Scot and other bodies will not intervene in cases such as this, and in future, local important heritage and biodiversity could be lost. I therefore ask the committee to urge the Scottish Government to grant protected status to this primitive goat species, or as the goats are described by the popular local newspaper, the E&L Advertiser, our feral friends.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. Colleagues, the dead hand of Nature Scot, I'm sorry to say, my prejudice provoked yet again. Why is it I find myself finding it difficult at times to understand really what the connection between Nature Scot and those people on the ground and in communities often is. Do any colleagues have any thoughts or suggestions as to... Yes, Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. And believe it or not, as somebody who's spent many years climbing Greymare's Tail and spent many hours watching the goats there, has brought not only a great pleasure to myself, but every scout I take up there during the summer holidays. So I have a personal connection there with the goats at Greymare's Tail. Can the committee consider writing to UK Joint Nature Conservation Council seeking its views on the matter, and to the Scottish Government seeking clarity on how it plans to ensure the survival of a primitive goat species, given its acknowledgement of their benefits to biodiversity?
And might we couple that with a reference to the fact that this petition has attracted an unusual degree of public support, drawing attention to the number of individuals who have done so, and also to the fact that some of the evidence that apparently the Scottish Government believes Nature Scot has acted on has been directly challenged by those in the communities who know more on this subject than I imagine Nature Scot do. Mr Ewing.
Just following on the theme of commenting on Nature Scot, it does seem that all species are equal, but some are more equal than others. And goats being the ones that don't seem to merit any care or attention from Nature Scot. Why that's the case is completely baffling, but no doubt Nature Scot could explain it. So I did want to suggest that we ask Nature Scot to explain why goats apparently aren't worth anything as a species, and on what value judgment basis they've come to that apparent conclusion. But I also wanted to pick up on a point that Linda Graham in her written submission of the 27th of August has made, which is this, that unless there is grazing of moorland upland by cattle, sheep or feral goats, because I believe I'm told the cattle and sheep have gone. So that just leaves the goats. And if there's no grazing, then the moorland, as we've seen in my constituency, in the largest recorded wildfire in Scotland's history, in Dava, Carbridge and Loch-in-Dorb, and also fires in the borders, as I gather, in the Easter that there is a sort of creation of a fire load of tinder because there's no grazing of vegetation. And that I'm told in the local press, perhaps the August Journal that Mr Hoy mentioned and others, I don't know, there has been concern expressed by the fire service that unless there is grazing, vegetation will increase the propensity for fires to become even more serious than they have been in the past. So I would be grateful if we could perhaps write to the Chief of the Fire Service, SFRS in Scotland, to ask if they have a view about the desirability of moorland being subject to grazing, because it does seem to be pretty obvious sound management practice, which again seems to be a practice that has gone by the attention of Nature Scot.
Agreed. Are we all content to proceed on that basis? We are. So I thank our colleagues much. You'll be pleased that we're keeping the petition open and acting robustly in light of the evidence you and the petitioners and all those who've supported the petition have brought to the committee. Thank you. We move to petition number 2153 to reduce council tax by 50% for single persons. This has been lodged by Lisa Williams, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to reduce council tax by 50% for single persons. The Spice briefing for this petition explains that most single-person households receive a 25% council tax discount, which is also available if only one person living in a property is liable for council tax. Additionally, the Scottish Government's response explains that apart from the single-person discount, there is a council tax reduction (CTR) scheme designed to reduce the council tax liabilities of any household. Based on an assessment of income, capital and other circumstances, the Government indicates that currently more than 450,000 households in Scotland benefit from this scheme, and it encourages the petitioner to reach out to their local council to check their eligibility for CTR. The Scottish Government and COSLA are undertaking a joint programme of engagement to consider potential council tax reform aimed at improving fairness and sustainability. The Government suggests that the evidence gathered as part of this engagement work will be the basis of a Scottish Parliament debate in early 2026, with a view to inform the next Parliament of the findings and of potential directions for reform to the wider council tax system, although I note that the Minister has already suggested that there will be a revaluation during the course of the next Parliament in relation to properties and council tax, which will have its own consequential issues, I would have thought. Do members have any comments or suggestions for actions? Mr Torrance.
In light of the evidence in front of the committee, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standard Orders on the basis that, in addition to existing 25% single tax discount, the Scottish Government's Council Tax Reduction Scheme can provide additional council tax relief to those eligible to receive it. And the Scottish Government has committed to a parliamentary debate in 2026, following its joint work with COSLA, with a view to informing the next Parliament and suggest potential directions for council tax reform.
Are we content, really, in light of the strong direction of the Government and our inability to take the issues raised, the petition forward? So we thank the petitioner, but you will understand that there is little we can do in light of the very direct view expressed by the Scottish Government. Petition number 2157 to update planning advice for energy storage issues and ensure that it includes clear guidance for the location of battery energy storage systems near residences and communities. It's been lodged by Ben Morse on behalf of the Cockenzie and Port Seaton Community Council, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to update the advice for planning authorities when considering applications for energy storage and ensure that it includes clear guidance about the location of battery energy storage systems, BESS bays, by setting out a minimum baseline level of practice around the location and proximity of bays in relation to residential properties, public buildings and community amenities. The Spice briefing states that battery energy storage systems, bays, use batteries such as lithium or ion to store electricity at times when supply is higher than demand. Bays are generally considered to be grid-scale systems, often over 100 megawatt in capacity, which can release electricity when it is needed. The briefing makes reference to the common concern for the potential fire risk of lithium-ion batteries. with a number of examples of base fires, but with no reliable publicly accessed record of the number of such fires. The Scottish Government response mentions commissioning consultants in April 2025 to produce planning guidance on battery energy storage systems and anticipates this work to be completed this autumn. The guidance is intended to promote good practice in determining BEIS applications and set out information on other relevant regulatory regimes applicable to BEIS in Scotland. The Government also makes reference to existing and well-established consenting procedures for renewable energy and electricity grid infrastructure, which include consideration of residential amenity and cumulative impacts. The Government's position is that while the National Planning Framework (NPF4) stipulates that the potential impacts in communities and nature are important considerations in the decision-making process for energy projects, it is for the decision-maker to determine what weight to attach to NPF4 policies on a case-by-case basis, with all applications being subject to site-specific assessments. In an additional submission, the petitioner further argues that rigorous guidelines on the suitability of BEIS sites would provide immediate clarity to the consenting and planning process and ease the burden on local authorities and on communities. The petitioner insists that the Government has not addressed the central question posed by his community, which is to do with the appropriate level of proximity of BEIS sites to communities such as his, in light of concerns regarding the lack of safety and emergency procedures, noise and loss of amenity or agricultural land. And before I invite members to comment, I should possibly declare an interest in that I have an active case in my own constituency where I am challenging the criteria by which approvals have been granted, very similar to the aims and objectives raised by the petitioner, and would therefore place that interest on record. Do members have any comments or suggestions for actions? David Torrance.
I wonder if the committee would consider writing to a Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy and ask for an update on the work to produce planning guidance on battery energy storage systems, including the Scottish Government's view on any initial recommendations. And I wonder if it would also write and ask for clarification by the Scottish Government on its position regarding concerns further highlighted by petitioners' additional submission, particularly in the terms of BESS proximity to communities.
Any other comments? Mr Ewing.
I would support Mr Torrance's recommendation and just add that there would be a clear benefit of guidelines in assisting local authorities who presently don't have the benefit of any guidelines. And there is a degree of concern about the fire risks, but in the absence of any guidelines and analysis provided by the government following the work which they've described has been done, which is to be completed in the autumn, then I think local authorities have got one hand tied behind their back and are in a very unenviable position. So I do hope that the Scottish Government will really act more swiftly than they normally do. They said the work that Ironside Fire are doing is to be completed this autumn. So that's really about now as the leaves fall from the trees. So let's see the guidelines and let's see them get on with it, because they really are required for many reasons that have been identified by the petitioners.
I wholly agree with that. There are a lot of live applications around the country at the moment, as many of the developers are seeking to establish sites. There's concern, I think, too, that the volume of sites that are being identified and progressed through the planning is wildly in excess of the actual potential immediate requirement. And since most of these sites are being established, creating a new base of energy storage, many of the risks associated with them are as theoretical as the practice of the storage itself, because they haven't been around long enough. But we do know that there have been fires in other parts of the country and the world where these sites have been established. So I do think there is a need for a fairly urgent framework in terms of this, because, as Mr Ewing says, local authorities who are predisposed to look favourably upon environmentally friendly forms of future energy generation are erring on the side of that over the concerns of people in the community and the potential unknown risks that have yet to be properly quantified. Mr Russell.
The other thing is that because most of them are over 50 megawatt of storage, the local authorities are bypassed. They consult with the local authorities, but primarily it's in the same category as the wind farms, that you know, the local considerations aren't fully taken on board.
I don't think they provide many jobs. I mean, I could be wrong, Convener, but that's what I've heard anecdotally, and therefore the benefits are unclear, apart from possibly in the storage capacity.
And they're not lovely to look at. So we will keep the petition open, and we will seek to try and expedite government guidance in relation to all of this, on the basis that there are many live applications around just now, and that we are concerned that in the absence of that guidance, consideration of local concerns and unknown consequences arising from these battery storage plants are not being properly accommodated or reflected. Agreed? We move now to petition number 2158 to introduce a maximum temperature for serving hot liquids to children in childcare settings. This Spice briefing tells us that the existing legislation sets out the temperatures at which foods must be cooked at and maintained, but not the maximum temperature foods or indeed liquids should be served at, in line with the responsibilities under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Local authorities set their own temperatures for serving food in schools. Apologies, my note doesn't actually tell me who submitted this petition. Is it referred to? Yeah, thank you. The Scottish Government states that it has carefully considered the issues raised in the petition with key partners and considers that current guidance in this area is appropriate. The Scottish Government published the Setting the Table guidance in October 24. This guidance relates to nutritional standards and practical advice for early learning and childcare providers, and it was produced by a working group consisting of national statutory bodies, clinical and nutritional experts and ELC sector representatives. This guidance states that food should not be served to children at the temperature at which it needs to be cooked. Instead, it should be left to cool a little in a safe area, away from children, and it should be tested by tasting before serving. The care inspectorate with which the Government is engaged has reinforced the message in the public guidance, indicating that ELC staff should not assume that the food which comes from the kitchen is immediately ready to be served. The Scottish Government has made it clear that it expects all ELC providers to adhere to all duties and guidance relating to food provision in order to ensure the safety of children in their care. Do we have any comments for Mr Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence before the committee, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that current guidance advises leaving hot food to cool in a safe area and testing it before serving. Most local authorities have set temperatures for serving food, and the Scottish Government expects all early learning and childcare providers to ensure the safety of children in their care and to adhere to all duties in the guidance relating to food provision.
Thank you, Mr Torrance. Are colleagues content with that suggestion? Mr Ewing.
I don't think there's really any alternative given the time we are in Parliament. I just point out that the petitioner's daughter was scalded and had was badly injured and scarred for life as a result of eating soup in a nursery, and I would have thought that children in kindergartens and nurseries are particularly vulnerable because they're not really able to assess risks in the way that older children can. So in supporting Mr Torrance, I wonder if we might want to write to the Minister to ask that reminders be issued through the appropriate authorities to those in charge of particularly nurseries and kindergartens with regard to this risk, because this particular family was denied any redress because there was a lack of guidelines, and that was the Care Inspectorate, I think rather disingenuously pointed to the lack of guidance as indicating they couldn't do anything with this family. I mean, that in itself seems pretty pathetic, actually, absurd. But be that as it may, Convener, you can't help but feel sympathy for the predicament that these parents found themselves in, although, as Mr Torrance says, the recommendation is that food be left to be cool. But plainly, that recommendation was not followed in this case, and maybe there are other cases too. So I think some reminders to those running these establishments would not go amiss if the Minister wants to be proactive about it.
All fair points, and happy to incorporate those in with the suggestions from Mr Torrance. Are we agreed? Yeah. Our penultimate new petition this morning is petition number 2162 to prevent strangers from filming or photographing children in public play parks. And this is lodged by Sharon Glenn and Alex O'Kane, who colleagues will recall is also the petitioner in relation to the child violence petition that we discussed earlier this morning. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to make it illegal for strangers to film or photograph children in public play parks. The Spice briefing explains that it is not illegal to take photographs or video footage in public places unless it is for criminal purposes. It is possible, however, for the police to charge an individual behaving in this manner under existing offences. There exists both a common law and statutory offence, breach of the peace. Under either offence, the police do not require to know or prove what the intended use of any photographs or films is. The behaviour itself can be enough to constitute an offence. The Scottish Government's response to the petition highlights Police Scotland's statement on this issue earlier in the year. The statement notes that Police Scotland is aware of concerns being shared on social media about filming in and around play parks, and that individuals have been charged with alleged offences of breach of the peace in connection with some incidents. The statement explains that police officers balance the rights of people to film with the potential to cause fear or alarm and make decisions based on individual circumstances. The statement also explained that a small number of unconnected reports of filming were found to be parents filming their own children or other individuals who were not filming children, and no criminality was established. The Scottish Government response states that while it may be possible to create a specific offence, in practice it is not clear what any such offence would provide to the police, prosecutors and courts in terms of powers that they do not already have to address inappropriate filming or photographing of children in public places using existing mechanisms. The petitioners have provided 2 written submissions to the committee outlining their concerns. The first submission shares their view that the current arrangements are failing to properly protect children, and it states that the current legislation was not designed and has not evolved to consider the fact that most people are carrying phones with video and photography capabilities. Excuse me. The petitioners suggest that either photography and videoing be prevented entirely or be conditionally permitted so long as the police have new powers to investigate and reasonable explanations are given by those questions. The final written submission suggests that we consider the possibility of signage being put in place in play parks to ask that no videoing and photography takes place. Do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Or comments? Mr Torrance.
In light of the evidence in front of us from the Scottish Government and from Police Scotland, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 on the basis that the Scottish Government has no plans to take forward the action called for in the petition. The police are required to balance the rights of people to film with the potential to cause fear or alarm and make decisions based on individual circumstances. It is possible for the police to charge an individual for inappropriate filming or photographing children under existing offences, and existing mechanisms allow for individuals to be charged with a breach of the peace for inappropriate filming and photography, and the Scottish Government's submission shows that this power has been used with examples from earlier this year.
Thank you. Any comments from colleagues, or are we content, given the direction from the Government in relation to the existing powers that exist without a specific additional offence being created, are we content to close the petition? I think it otherwise might be quite a large piece of work for the committee at this stage in its life to adequately pursue. So I'm minded, I think, to accept Mr Torrance's suggestion, but maybe suggest the petitioners that it is something that maybe the next Parliament would have a degree of opportunity to look at a little more in detail. But given the Government's assessment in relation to existing powers, are we content to close? Mr Ewing, yeah? Yeah. Thank you. That brings us, so we thank the petitioners on this occasion, and I hope they will have noted the accompanying remarks just made. Petition number 2161, our final petition today, is to extend the time for complaints through the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman for neurodivergent people to 2 years. And this has been lodged by Ivor Roderick Bissett. Mr Bissett, I think, had hoped to be with us this morning, but isn't well enough to be present. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to amend the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman Act 2002 to allow for a 2-year complaints period for people with cognitive disabilities. Section 10 of the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman Act 2002 sets out time limits and procedure for complaints. It states that Ombudsmen must not consider a complaint made more than 12 months after the day on which the person aggrieved first had notice of the matter complained of, unless the Ombudsman is satisfied that there are special circumstances which make it appropriate to consider a complaint made out with that period. The SPSO website states that special circumstances can include demonstrating a good reason to delay because of health or personal difficulties such as defining disability that impacts upon daily living tasks and functioning. Well, in the petitioner's circumstances, he'd applied for a time extension from the SPSO, believing that he would get a reasonable adjustment under the Equality Act of 2010, on the grounds that he is neurodivergent. However, this request was rejected. The Scottish Government's response shares the SPO's position that decisions in special circumstances are made on a case-by-case basis, with guidance, note, with guidance available to decision makers. The submission states that if the SPSO decides not to waive the time limit, that decision is subject to the SPO's review process, under which the decision can be looked at again, and which provides an opportunity for the complainant to supply new information. The Scottish Government is therefore of the view that the current legislation has a degree of flexibility and offers the SPSO a wide range of discretion as to whether to waive the time limit, with any such decision also being subject to the SPSO's review process. Edward Mountain MSP has provided a written submission in support of the petition. Mr Mountain believes there should be a separate category to the existing special circumstances category, which allows for people with cognitive disabilities to have their complaints considered out with the 12-month period. Well, Mr Ewing.
Well, I would suggest that we write to the SPSO to ask for further information held and request for extensions to the 12-month time limit. And if this information is unavailable, an explanation as to how the SPSO can be confident that the policies and processes are working for neurodiverse people, given the issues raised in the petition. I was made aware by Mr Bissett, whom I commend for bringing this petition forward, that the process has been a difficult one for him and has been resulted in some pressure and anxiety, which I think is most unfortunate and would not have arisen had the SPSO given the flexibility that surely it would be reasonable to expect them to exercise. And I feel very strongly that this is a fault on their part, and they must be called to book. That is what we are here for. And moreover, the idea that the fact that you can take a rejection to judicial review is phooey. I mean, it costs hundreds of thousands of pounds to raise a judicial review, and it involves a huge amount of money, massively more than would result from the additional workload to the SPSO of just granting the flexibility in the first place. And I thought we were supposed to be in Scotland sympathetic to people who have neurodivergent needs, like Mr Bissett. And I would commend Mr Mountain, my colleague, for taking forward the case, and do hope that we can get some answers from the SPSO to prove that they're not just another unaccountable quango.
To be fair to the SPSO, I don't think they say to a judicial review. I think they say that their decision can be looked at again, and it affords the opportunity for the complainant to supply new information. Mr Russell?
It would be interesting to know how many times they have actually extended it. You know?
I think exactly that, and I'm grateful to you for that suggestion. It was very much on my mind too. First of all, I think we would ask what this guidance is, because I don't think it's public. Secondly, I think we would ask in each of the last 5 years how many times the time limit has been waived, and on an anonymised basis what the circumstances were that led to that waiver.
Say that the judicial review aspect was raised by the Scottish Government on page 8 of the annex of the submissions, which is what I was referring to. But you're quite correct. There is an appeal process, but no, process. So it's really the Scottish Government that are pointing out a completely absurd course of action, which nobody in their right minds would dream of taking.
So we're grateful to Mr Bissett for bringing this petition forward. The committee is minded to keep the petition open, and it is going to take matters forward as colleagues have variously suggested. Are we content with that? We are. That concludes our meeting for today, and we will meet again on September the 24th. Thank you.